Hello and welcome to Items On, the podcast where you get to follow your favorite Melee players and personalities both on and off the sticks. I'm your host, Ethiopium, and today's special guest is Nicki. Nicki, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope you're having a great day as well.
Oh, I am. I'm never having a bad day when I get to interview someone new, so I'm always excited. Usually, how we start these interviews is you let me know how you got into Melee and what were you doing before you got into Melee.
All right, yeah, that's a great question. So I grew up with two older brothers, and they're quite a bit older than me, 3 and 4 years each. And we're always a very competitive household, of course. If you got three boys like duking it out and everything, then when you give them a game like Super Smash Bros. Melee, then there's gonna be lots of not necessarily drama involved, but it's gonna get serious. Everyone's gonna want to win, and because I was the youngest, I would always lose. And then after we played Melee casually for a couple of years, roughly 10 years later in like 2015, I somehow stumbled upon the documentary. It was linked in a Reddit post of like some random picture that had like Captain Falcon in it. I watched that. I was like, I can finally get better at this game than my brothers ever were. And I think I took it a step or two too far, and now I'm here. And that's how I got into Melee. Yeah.
You know, it's really funny because a lot of people that I interview, they credit a sibling rivalry to their start in Super Smash Bros. So you're not the first one to say that, hey, I had to beat my brothers. That's why I got into the game.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I also have a younger sister who's now really good at Mario Kart for the same reason, because like she wanted to beat me in that game. So I think that's where the excellence in video games can come from. If you just have someone living next to you, or in the room next to you, and they mock you for not being able to beat you, then you gotta adapt. You gotta figure it out.
Were you always competitive or was this just your only avenue of competition?
I was always pretty competitive. I had started doing sports from a pretty young age. I was just doing athletics, and then I played soccer like any German kid does, and I was pretty good at all of those. But then when I was a teenager, I eventually like stopped doing some of these sports for different reasons, and I needed like a different outlet to be competitive in. And roughly around that time is when I watched the Melee documentary, and then that was kind of like a smooth transition into that, just to like have all my competitive vibes or my drive go into something else.
So once you watched the documentary, you decided, all right, you know what? I'm going to go hard in this game. I'm going to try. Like, was that like, immediately I was entering into German tournaments or how did that look, that transition into the Super Smash Bros. Scene?
Um, it took me quite a while because I watched the documentary and I saw all these like people doing crazy stuff in the game that I had never even considered to be possible. And my thought for like the first year after having watched it was I will never be able to do that anyways. Like these people are so good, they travel to like different cities or even different countries to play in tournaments. Like it'll take me ages before I can like go to a tournament and even like hold up to how good these people are. So
Hmm.
I just kind of like got a setup like a couple months after watching the documentary. I was only able to get the the Brawl mod game, Project M on it. So I wasn't actually practicing in Melee. I like learned L canceling and wave dashing in Project M. And I always thought I'm just doing this for fun. I'll never actually go to tournaments. And then roughly a year after having watched the documentary and like having actively practiced tech skill for like 7 months already, that's when I finally decided to go to a local for the first time. Yeah, it took me a while to like start believing that I could actually do that. I could actually go to tournaments and like try to beat other players.
Was there something specific that made you say, okay, you know what? I'm going to try it. I'm going to go to this local? Or was it just like an out of a blue thing of like, you know what? Fuck it.
I had a school friend. Like I met them in fifth grade, and we would sometimes play Brawl together. And then when I got into Melee and the competitive scene, I like told him about it, and we'd play together like I don't know, maybe once a week or so, but just like very casually. Of course, I started getting better much quicker than them because I was actively practicing tech skill in between sessions and like reading about the game. But at some point, like I figured out there was a local in my city, and I asked them if they wanted to come, and they were like, sure. I had to do a bit of convincing, but just having another person go with me, where I knew I would at least be better than them. I think that kind of helped me when I was like 17 years old to feel confident enough to actually go into that venue.
And so, what was that experience like going to your first tournament? I'm sure people are excited to hear.
So my first tournament, of course, was like a local on a Tuesday evening. It was in a very strange part of the city, like in somewhat of like a red light district.
Mm.
So going there is like a not yet 18-year-old kid. It was hilarious to an extent because you're like walking around and there's like ladies talking to you through the windows and like asking you to come in, but you're just walking around trying to figure out where you can play Super Smash Bros. Eventually, I did hear the Dreamland theme coming from somewhere, so I knew roughly where I had to go, and we did find our way in there. But it was like in a basement where the venue was amazing and awful at the same time. We
Mm.
hosted like 20 to 30 people tournaments in there, which was pretty big like back then for, that city at least. But I think legally only like 8 people were allowed in there because it was a basement. And in case of an emergency, like it just wouldn't be safe for everyone in there. But yeah, we didn't really, or the people back then didn't really care too much. We just wanted to play Melee. So once I found my way in there and I heard the Dreamland music, it was great. I saw a couple people play. I saw that on one setup someone was playing, and I thought like, okay, I think like just from watching them play, I think I could beat these people. And then like right from my first weekly, I think I did pretty well in region. I don't think I ever placed much lower than like fourth place, even at some of my first locals. So I think I very much over practiced before attending my first local. But yeah, I think I was just very insecure about like wanting to not seem like a bad player, which of course, like if I had just gone to locals earlier, I would have started improving so much quicker. Um, but yeah, being there and actually meeting these people and just sitting down to play the game, I didn't imagine that it would be so easy to, meet people and just bond with them over, yeah, just this one single game because you can just talk to them for 24 hours straight just about Melee. So it's very hard to not make friends at your first local if you're just, yeah, in love with the game.
That's an awesome story. I mean, it's funny that you say that you're over practiced. I mean, so many people they go in, they go 0 and 2 for a while, and then they finally, oh, I figured it out and this and that. I mean, do you feel how did you practice? I guess neutral when you're just practicing by yourself. Like, did you naturally just like know, okay, this guy's gonna whiff here, or how did that work out?
Um, I had been watching and following the competitive scene for almost a year at that point, and I was always like reading the threads on Reddit. I was always reading YouTube comments. So I was just trying to consume as much as possible. And I've always been like, when it comes to video games, a very not like necessarily perceptive person, but I'm always thinking about like, hey, why is this person doing this? Like, why is this good? Why did that fail or why did that work? So just for neutral, I had a pretty all right idea of like the very rough like what beats shield, what beats crouch canceling, how do you whiff punish. Um, and I did start out as a Falco player, which I think does help when you go to a local where people aren't that good either,
Hmm.
because you can just kind of skip the neutral, and if your tech skill is good, you just have to hit the first down air somehow, and then the next 3 or 4 hits aren't that hard to get after that. So I think that definitely would have been much harder if I started out as like a puff player or something, because you can't tech skill your way through people as easily. But as bases, especially in like the time of 2015, in a region that wasn't that good, that worked out just fine for me.
So once you completed your first melee tournament, you're finding friends in the scene, you're talking about the game. Were you just like addicted at that point? You're like, all right, I'm completely committed, or was it still like a little bit of, I don't know, like maybe I'll go to more, or what was your thought process?
I was fully committed. Pretty much every week, I just spent waiting for the local to take place on Tuesday. Like that would be the highlight of every day of the week.
Mm-hmm.
And then between the locals, I would just think about my sets that I played. I'd go home whenever I had time and just solo practice as much as I could to not make those same mistakes again. So I was like fully committed to it. Of course, like I was still in school back then, so I had to do that. I had, had friends that I spent time with as well. But I was super invested in the game, and I didn't like when I did have free time. I wanted to spend it on Melee, and I did.
What do you think drove that commitment towards the game? I mean, is there an innate feeling towards the game? Is it love? Is it the dedication needed? I mean, what was some of those things that made you say, "This is the game for me"?
That's a good question. I don't know. It felt like the more I look back on it, the more it seemed just like an addiction because
Mm-hmm.
I was just having so much fun playing it that I didn't need to convince myself to practice much. Of course, the other side of it was that like losing felt so bad that I just didn't want to feel like that again. So I practiced even harder to never have that happen again. So yeah, I think it's just how the game is. The movement's really fun. I had a deep connection to it from my childhood. And I knew that I was in a region where there are lots of players where I feel like I should already be beating them, but I wasn't quite yet. That just allowed me to like always feel like I'm very close to reaching another important milestone. So that, yeah, sitting down to practice each day never felt like something I had to force myself to do. It was just what I wanted to do anyways.
What were some of those important milestones that you were trying to obtain as you climbed up the ranks in Germany and in Europe?
Um, So at my local, we had like there's a very clear or somewhat clear separation of like the people who had been playing before the documentary and then the people who had come in as part of like having seen the documentary. So we had like a top three of three more old school players who had been playing for between 4 to 7 years at that time, right? Because we're talking about like late 2015, which is almost 10 years ago now. So we had like a top three of three players who had just a pretty strong or pretty large time advantage in terms of how long they've been playing the game. And yeah, wanting to beat these players and just, losing to their like old school style of melee where they just read you better than you can read them. And I always felt like they were making stupid reads that shouldn't work and they only worked because I was playing bad. That really like motivated me to just figure that out and not like give them that stuff for free anymore. Of course, the other players who started at a similar time as I did, trying to consistently beat them as well was always like a goal of mine. But that just kind of, I didn't really have to work too hard for that. These players were good, but I always like, I started off at my first local already being a slight step ahead of them. And since I then also started improving quicker than them, I was pretty much just always looking up. And when I did beat someone for the first time, I usually wouldn't lose to them again. So it was really just about like figuring out those three players who were ahead of me, just to make sure that I can get past that. And once I realized that those players are beatable, I pretty quickly started thinking about like not just my city, but like the country rankings. I wanted to be top 10 in Germany because I played against someone who was like in that range and I felt like they weren't that good. So I was like, I gotta at least get there. And then it just kept spiraling like that.
I want to ask you a question about that when you're commenting on the fact that there's those three players that played before you that had a certain hold on your local, and those were the guys that you wanted to beat. I feel like that's something relatable to a lot of players who have those two or three people that just have it over them. What were some of the lessons that you had to learn, whether it be play style or mentality lessons, that you needed to learn in order to beat those three players?
Um, Interestingly enough, I had like back then after each local, I would actually just write down on a physical book like what I wanted to work on, what I felt like went wrong, what I want to do differently next time. A lot of it was just like stuff like, you know, stop full hopping in the corner because the good player just like jumps up and shines you out of the air and then you die. Or it was stuff like when Falcon down throws you, don't tech roll into the same direction that you DI'd, right? And these good players, they would either just tell me that themselves because we're always talking, like I was friends with all of them. So it wasn't like there was some real rivalry going on. We were on good terms. And I did have help from them in those situations. But mostly it was just very simple stuff like, yeah, in this situation, use your full hop back here less often because it gets obvious. It was very simple stuff because, like I said, these players weren't even amazing on like a German scale, and Germany as a country is already not that amazing at like a global scale outside of ice, obviously back then. So yeah, it wasn't like there's like some really deep breakthroughs I had to make. It was just like learn how to DI a certain combo or learn when your full hop back air is obviously going to get crouch canceled. So maybe, start doing an empty line grab instead. Yeah, those were some of the notes that I saw when just looking through my notebook from back then yesterday. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, That is interesting because I feel like a lot of players they try to focus on a lot of things as they try to get better, and it's interesting you simplify it and be like, yeah, if I wanted to beat this guy, DI this certain combo the right way or stop full hopping this certain way. Do you feel like at the lower levels, a lot of those matches come down to a certain habit or something like that, that is something that the opponent is reading or the punishing?
Yeah, for sure. I think as obviously if we start at a really low level, we just look at a Marth who only forward smashes against someone who cannot punish Marth forward smash out of shield. Like once that person manages to learn how to do that, the entire like the vibes just change completely in that player matchup. And I think that's kind of like how it was back then. Not to that extent, of course, because my opponents were already quite a bit better than that. But because I was so frustrated when I made a mistake that I already knew I was making beforehand, it just motivated me to really quickly like try to unlearn bad habits and replace them with something else. Um, and it did change things quickly enough that I could stay motivated week to week. And even if I made improvements but didn't win quite yet, I was still able to pinpoint those improvements I did make, knowing that, yeah, it wasn't going to be much longer until I actually would be able to take a set from these players.
One question about this, like, sort of local scene and where you were, finding your legs as a melee player. It's interesting because earlier on you said that losing felt so bad to you, like it hurt so bad to lose. But the way that you talk about your losses and the way that you analyze the things that you do right and wrong seems very black and white and devoid of, like, the emotional aspects that come with loss. So how were you able to separate, the emotional aspect of damn it, I lost. Like this sucks to okay, I need to get better in these certain aspects of the game.
Yeah, I think the way I talk about it now is very much different from how I would have talked about it back then, because
Mm.
now I've had almost a decade to reflect on all of that and just my general improvement process. Um, Back then, I would just feel so bad after losing that I would go to bed and still feel bad. And I knew the only thing I could do about it was to just do better next time, right? The idea of like, I wasn't even considering that maybe feeling this bad about a loss isn't healthy in the first place. I was just thinking, how do I not lose again so I don't have to feel like this, right? Because if you feel really bad after losing, you can fix that by working on your mentality and just getting better at handling losses, which is very important. Or you can just try to never lose again, which, if you're in a small, not that strong region, like I was back then, it felt like a very reasonable thing to be able to achieve somewhat soon. So that just kind of motivated me to like when I felt bad about having lost, just telling myself this cannot happen again. I just have to do better, which is obviously a very unhealthy mindset. And I'm glad I was able to get away from that. But it definitely helped me improve as quickly as I did back then in my region.
Now, at what point were you transitioning from Falco to Fox? Because I actually didn't know that you start off with Falco.
Yeah, so I think the first 2 or 3 months, I think I only played Falco, and then I had like a year where I played Fox and Falco both. Um, I did it like the other way around from most people do it. Like I played Falco against floaties and Fox against fast fallers. Usually people like Falco mains will go Fox for like Puff or Peach, but I just like I felt like those matchups were much easier as Falco, so I just ended up playing Falco against floaties and then Fox diddoing people. Yeah, so I had a Falco phase for about like maybe a quarter of a year, and then eventually, because especially back then, the common common idea was that Fox is the best, and if you just want to win, you can just solo main Fox, and that'll be all you ever need. I eventually like gave into that and believed that if I just played Fox, it would be better in the long run. And yeah, that's what I did then, starting in like 2016, I think.
And so when you started to make these jumps to more of the German scene at this point, you were then fully maining Fox at that point?
Yes, I was. My first tournament outside of like the area or the city I was living in was in May of 2017, which was Awakening, which was the biggest German tournament series that Germany's ever had. And yeah, I was already just a full-on Fox main by that point and didn't play anything else for until I then eventually started playing Ice Climbers.
What was the what were some of the lessons that you took home from that awakening? Because going from a small local scene to a big regional like that is a little bit of a shock to the system, both as a competitor and as a person, right?
Yeah, so going to that tournament, I had a very good motivation for it. At our local, we had an ice climbers player who was not top 10 in our country level, but pretty good. And I would always beat them really hard. And we had a very good ice season in Germany back then called Däumling. And so people online started talking about like, oh, yo, Nicki's so good against ice climbers. Maybe, he's not ranked in the country yet, but he might be able to beat the best ice climbers player in the country. So like a money match was set up between myself and Däumling, and people in the German Melee Discord were like side betting way too much money on it. So I was really motivated to at least win that set, because if I win that, then at least I have a money match win over someone who's like top 5 in the country. And I won that set on the first day of the event, and that gave me a lot of motivation, and it showed me that maybe these players aren't as good as I always thought they were, right? Because the reason I never went to locals in the beginning was because I thought like just the idea of beating anyone at a Smash tournament doesn't seem realistic to me. And then within like a year and a half, I was able to beat someone who was like, ranked within the continent in Europe and also ranked pretty highly in Germany. And yeah, then at the tournament, I lost to 2 players where I felt like I could have won if I just wasn't stupid. And that, of course, again, motivated me because I realized these good players that I thought were untouchable are actually back then I just said I think they're bad at the game.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, obviously, they weren't bad at the game and they aren't bad at the game, right? And it's just something I was telling myself because I had like this very negative view on myself, which is why I felt so bad about the losses. But I extended that to other players as well because I thought I wasn't that good. Anyone I was beating or was barely able to maybe beat could also not be that good. So yeah, that's kind of what kept me going further and further, just realizing that all of these players are beatable, even though I thought there's no way like a year ago.
I mean, do you feel like through Melee you learned a little bit about not necessarily confidence, but like your worth as a player? Because I feel like it took you a while to jump into the scene at the start, and then even when you beat these great players or whatever, you say like, oh, they're not that good, I'm not that good. Like, when did you like realize like, you know what, I am that good, and like the players who I beat, they are good as well, like I'm just like a quality player.
Hmm. That's a good question. I think one of the reasons or one of the problems which was one of the reasons why I didn't go to locals earlier was because I thought that like my ability to play the game well would somehow like say something about me as a person, right? Like if I
Mm.
practice and then go to the tournament and don't do well, then I think like that would have made me feel really bad about myself. Which now, like of course I know isn't a good mindset to have and it's something you need to move away from. Um, and that's I think something that I then learned like a couple years later than that. Because in the beginning I was kind of getting away with that. I did feel really bad about myself when I lost, but I was able to improve quickly enough that I like never really struggled with that. But then eventually, not necessarily just from myself, but by seeing other people go through the same thing and having a really hard time with it, I realized that it's extremely important that you first of all give your opponents the respect that they deserve for how good they are. Because if you don't do that, then you can't feel good about beating them. So just giving people the credit they deserve, while also realizing that how good you are at the game doesn't really say anything about you as a person, because so much of it comes down to factors that you can't control anyways. Yeah, that was a very, very big lesson for me to learn in Melee and in life. And it also gave me a lot of confidence because now I know that even if I try hard at something and don't make it, it doesn't mean that it wasn't worth trying or that I'm worthless. It just means that I can either try again or I can try something else. And yeah, that does give me a lot of confidence because now I have the confidence to fail, which I definitely didn't have when I started playing. And just even like 5 years ago, I didn't have that yet.
It's really awesome. I feel like a theme of this podcast really is how Melee touches you not only within the game but outside the game, and it's really awesome to hear that you're able to take these life lessons and be confident to fail in certain scenarios that might not even relate to Melee, you know?
Yeah, it's Melee teaches you so much, and you touched upon just general confidence. I feel like if you're able, or for me at least, having to play a close Melee set, being like in a game 5 situation, and like that would make me shake so badly that I just couldn't play anymore in the beginning. Like my nerves would get so bad that if you asked me to do a short hop, which I had done a million times the week leading up to an event, I just wouldn't have been able to do it anymore. And getting those nerves under control, like nothing phases me anymore. If I'm just suddenly called up to like do a presentation in front of 500 people, like I don't care. I'll just go up and talk. It,
Yeah.
it's crazy how like the challenges Melee brings you if you can yeah face them and like come out on top over time. Everything else in life has seemed so much less stressful than just that whole process of trying to get your nerves under control in Melee and figuring out like what you're even improving for and learning stuff about yourself that teaches you what your own motivations are and where your like subconscious drives to do certain things come from.
I feel like a lot of people struggle with what you just said, which is the nerves factor, especially in Melee, where, when it's clutch time, it's game five or game three, and it's last stock, you just don't do the thing that you've practiced so many times before. Were there certain specific things that you had to implement in order to get those nerves to calm down, or was it a mentality change?
I of course like telling yourself to not be nervous doesn't really work.
Hmm.
It's like when you're stuck in the corner in Melee and you roll in, you get hit by Captain Falcon knee. Telling yourself to not roll in anymore, that's not gonna work. You're gonna be in the same spot. You're gonna panic and you're gonna do it, right? So you need something else that you can shift your focus to that you can use as a replacement option in that situation. And that's the same way I approach it for my mentality. Is that I realized that telling myself to just not be nervous anymore or just playing more wasn't working, or at least not working quickly enough. So I tried to come up with a couple of like replacement thoughts or specific mantras I could tell myself that would help me get that stuff more under control. In the very beginning, it was thinking about the fact that my opponents are likely as nervous as I am, probably even more. And just by because usually when you get nervous, you kind of feel like you have a lot to lose because you don't want to miss out on the opportunity or you don't want to get upset and have people look down on you. But by realizing that the other person is like they're in the same position, right? They want to get that upset or they don't want to get upset by you. That helped me like go from a defensive position to like one where I feel like I can exploit that and I can be like, the predator who's trying to take down my opponent again.
Mm.
In the long run, what helped me the most was just rethinking why I care so much in the moment, and realizing that any individual set isn't really like, it doesn't mean anything about me as a person, right? If I go game five last stock with someone and then either like they shine spike me or I shine spike them, like what does that really change, right? Like that's one interaction out of 10,000 that I've played in Melee, and just having won or lost that one set shouldn't change how I view myself as a player or as a person too much. And that helped me a lot, just like preparing myself before every set by saying, hey, this set, win or lose, it doesn't change who you are as a player. It doesn't change your worth as a person. It's just one set out of many. You will have another chance eventually because Melee isn't going to die, like ever pretty much, in a practical sense.
Yeah.
So you don't have to worry about that. Even if you barely don't beat this good player, there will be another chance. And yeah, all these things help me just calm myself down. And then I learned to remind myself of them before a set. I learned to reintroduce those thoughts during my gameplay to make sure that I'm always like staying grounded. Um, because if you aren't able to get your mentality under control, you just end up playing worse. And so like forcing yourself to care less by taking away some of the weight of the set will make you play better, right? Which is weird because you want to play your best, you want to try really, really hard. But if you try too hard, then you play worse, and then that's very counterproductive. So yeah, figuring out ways to make yourself be less afraid of losing, and make yourself be less afraid of not getting the win. Yeah, that's what did it for me.
Well, you were also touching on how much it hurt earlier in your career when you did lose, where you would go to sleep still sad about the loss, and the only way that you could make it go away is basically get up and practice and try again. Do you feel like your mentality after a loss has shifted as well? And if so, how?
Um, I think just the overall context of the sets I play has shifted so much that it's somewhat hard to compare.
Hmm.
Um, I do think that I'm very much confident in my abilities as a player. So even if I do drop a set to someone nowadays, even in Germany, I don't really it doesn't really affect me too much because I know that, okay, I can just like try again from losers. And if I lose, then I can just try again at another tournament because I know how good I am. Of course, I don't know exactly, right? Which is because I can't go to an A that often. So on the global scale, I don't know how good exactly I am.
Mm.
But I know that I can meet these players. I know what I'm doing that's working. When I play against them and lose, I probably learn something about what I'm doing that isn't working. So yeah, now when I lose, it's just like, yep, that's fine. I'll just try again. I have a good idea on what I want to work on. Of course, it's still annoying, but it's no longer as big of a crisis as it was for me back then. Because now a loss is just like, all right, I lost this set. Like I'll try to do better next time. And if I win next time, that's great. And if I lose again, then that's also great because now I have like a new rival where I can, try to learn more stuff over time. So yeah, it's of course it changes based on if I'm playing someone where I know I'll get another chance soon versus when I go to my one North American tournament per year and then I barely lose to a top player, where I know that there is a high chance that the next time I get to play them is not going to be within the next 5 years. That can still be somewhat difficult to just deal with. But even in those sets when I lose them, I don't feel nearly as bad as I did losing a local in like 2017.
That's awesome. It's very cool to hear that growth mentally, and I love how melee and competition in general can bring out that growth in people. I think my last question on this topic is you said something interesting, which is, I know how good of a player I am. I have that confidence to know that where I am as a player. And it is interesting you say that because as someone who is in EU, like you said, you don't get to come out and play in the NA tournaments as much. And if you do, just with the nature of how tournaments go and variance, you might take a win, you might take a loss here and there, and you won't get that run back immediately, like you said. Where do you what is that cornerstone of confidence? What's that thing that you can put your hat on and say, yeah, I know I'm this good of a player? Where do you get that from, I guess?
Um, I mean, that's a good question. Of course, there's the European tournaments, where if I do well, I know that okay, at least on this level, this scale, I'm good. For example, the tournament Valhalla this year was really stacked for like in a European context, but like I think the entire top three of the tournament were all not ranked globally, just because none of them had met the eligibility criteria. Um, so it's like hard to tell, like, okay, these people that I just beat and lost to, were these like top 50 level players? Or were these players who wouldn't even be top 100 if they got to attend a lot, right? So I knew that, all right, I'm definitely among the best in Europe. I just didn't know where that put me on a global scale. So like those NA events that you do go to, you really want to make them count. This year, I went to Collision, which was my first NA tournament since 2021. In 2021, I went to Smash World Tour, and at that tournament, I managed to beat Fiction, which was like, one of my best wins at that point. And that was just like something that told me, like, okay, it doesn't matter if you lose now, you at least can compete with people who are like top 15, top 20 in the world. Even if this set might be like an outlier, this might have been like a 5% chance to win, and you might have rolled the 5% and gotten lucky. That's great. But at least you know that there is a chance that you could be around that level if you keep trying. So making those NA events count is great. Sometimes you do go to one and then you have to play like, I don't know, Mango or Zane in like winners top 64 because you're seated pretty low coming from Europe and then you lose. And then in losers, you might, have another like top 20 player who got upset and then you lose to two top 20 players and it was your only NA event of the year. So you're just not going to get any information out of that. Like, all right, now I know that I might not be top 20 in the world, but am I even top 100? I have no idea.
Mm.
So at least this year, and when I did go to an A, I always got at least one win that confirmed to me that I was around the level that I thought I was. Or usually I thought of myself little bit lower than what I ended up placing. So that's been my experience and my approach is that I usually just don't try to value myself too highly as a player so that whenever I go to an A, I can only end up being positively surprised. And even if I lose early, it's not the biggest deal because yeah, I don't need to know that I'm a good player globally because I still have plenty of goals that I can try to achieve in Europe.
Nice. No, that's a really great answer. I want to talk about that a little bit about that top 100 drive. You were ranked top 100 in 2019, I believe. I think you're in the 80s. I think 83rd or 86th. I don't remember
Yeah,
off the top.
83rd.
83rd. And that was with Fox at the time. You hadn't made the switch to Ice Climbers. Was that something that was that like a very important goal for you? I mean, describe that year and how you were able to obtain that, because coming out of Europe, it is extreme. I think it's very hard to be top 100, and just because you have to come to NA, it sounds like, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Back then, when the year started, there were a lot of tournaments lined up for Europe already that also had some American people flying out to those events. So in that year, I just went to one North American tournament, which was Shine 2019, and that was enough to get me eligible for the top 100, just by also going to the other European majors, which is a luxury we don't have at the moment and definitely don't have this year, because I don't think any of the European tournaments this year will count as majors. So I knew in that year that with how I've been doing in Europe, it was possible. And I just had this one NA tournament that would decide if I make it or not, right? Which is a pressure that Americans don't have to go through as much, because if you don't do well at one East Coast major, there's probably going to be two or three more that year that you can go to. And even if one of them ends up not being like, for whatever reason, right? You get sick, you just don't sleep well, that's all fine. But for me, I was flying out to that event. I looked at my bracket and I knew exactly like there's two players in my bracket path. If I beat both of them, I make it. If I lose to one of them, I don't. And that was just it. It was very stressful, of course, because it had been like my main goal in Melee. In 2017, I started being ranked in Germany and going up those ranks pretty quickly. So I stopped caring about those that much because I knew like I could, keep going up on those ranks. So I pretty quickly set my eyes on just being ranked top 100 in the world, because there was another one of those things where when I started playing, those people seemed like, something else. They seemed beyond human to me. If you're a top 100 player, that's like you're like a king. You just have royal blood, and I will bow down before you. So as a young teenager, I really wanted to reach that level. So yeah, I went to Shine 2019. I got the wins that I needed, and then I went back. And when I got the ranking, I felt like, all right, I did what I wanted to. And then, of course, in 2020, COVID happened, and it wasn't possible for Europeans to go to NA anymore, anyways, because of all the travel restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of like it would have been a very good time to quit the game, because I had reached my main goal. I had also gotten very close to reaching my main goal in Germany of just being ranked number one there. I think I might have already reached it by that point. Yeah, I think I did around that time as well. So like I had reached all my goals, and it wasn't going to be possible to travel anyways. So I was just kind of okay with taking it slow from there. But yeah, now I'm here.
So what was one of the reasons? I mean, what were the main reasons why you didn't quit? Because, like you said, I was gonna ask. It sounds like a great time to call it a day. Especially with COVID coming in.
Yeah, I think with how I already touched upon that a little bit of like that Melee was a bit of like an addiction for me,
Mm-hmm.
where I was always thinking about it, and it felt very easy for me to do nothing else but think about Melee and play the game. So I'd kind of like not necessarily fallen behind, but I'd taken like neglected other parts of my life. So if I had quit the game, I felt like I would have had to reinvent myself, and I would have had to like figure out who I was, what I wanted to do, and if I really want to spend this much time on the game, at least the way I was doing it back then. And I don't think like that was just something that I wasn't really able to deal with that at that time.
Mm.
So by giving myself a bit more time and just sticking with what's comfortable, it gave me more time to like really figure out like, is this really how I want to spend like the next 10 years? Like actually start thinking about where I see myself in 5 years, because as a teenager I wasn't doing that. So yeah, after a bit of time and like having to take a bit of a break just due to COVID and like no in-person tournaments happening, that kind of helped me like rediscover, or at least start thinking about, do I actually want to engage with the game the way I'm doing it now? Or are there ways where I can still love the game as much as I do right now, while also feeling more stable and secure with everything else I'm doing in life?
Mm. And I would like to know what were the conclusions, I guess, of that thought process. I mean, do you still feel addicted to the game, or have you put it in a more quote unquote healthier space in your life?
Yeah, like I said, I took all of my sense of self-worth just based on like how good I was at the game and if I was able to achieve my goals or not. And I think nowadays I'm much better with that. I have goals that I want to achieve, but I also have so much other stuff that I am actively doing with like with friends in terms of like just my own personal life and having a job and stuff like that, where I know that even if Melee were to completely disappear from me for whatever reason tomorrow, I would still be okay and I would still have stuff that I really like doing. Maybe not quite as much as Melee, but I can still invest a lot of time into it and like, because I have this somewhat addictive personality where if something like hooks me, then I'll get really into it.
Mm.
Um, and I have like a couple of these things now that aren't just the one game, which does help a lot.
Well, I'll ask about those later on in our interview where we get to talk more about your hobbies and interests outside the game.
Hmm.
Moving on, I guess, inside the game, you made the decision to switch to ice climbers, I believe around this time during COVID. Is that true?
Um, yeah, so I think I made the actual decision in like early 2022.
Mm-hmm.
During COVID, there were a few online brackets in Germany that I entered with ice climbers just like for fun. It was before Slippy had come out, so the online wasn't quite as good yet. Um, and wobbling was legal, so it was just kind of like a joke thing for me of like, haha, look at me, I'm wobbling these players who are already worse than me. I just found it funny. I have always found wobbling just to be hilarious as a concept, just completely independent of like if it should be banned or not. I just always thought it was funny.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and then when I like took that bit of a break throughout 2022, 2021, I realized like, okay, I think I can still play this game, but since I'm no longer like putting all my sense of self-worth on top of or into how well I'm doing, I'll just play the game in the way that I think is most fun for me, where I can still enjoy what I like about the game, which is trying to get better. And I can still do that with Ice Climbers. Um, and I just felt like the character always intrigued me, but I always thought that I had to play Fox to be the best player I could be. And I felt like I needed to be the best player I could be because that's how I like valued myself.
Do you feel like you have more fun with ice climbers just in general then? And if so, where does that come from in terms of comparing it with Fox?
Um, I feel like with Fox, because I was just trying to become the best player I could be, I wasn't like as curious about the game. Of course, I was. I was soaking in all the information that I could, and I was like trying to learn whatever I could learn. But with Ice Climbers, I think I give and also gave myself more room to make mistakes and just try stuff out for the sake of trying it out. Um, and with a character where their main like combo game of wobbling had just been banned from the game and people had to learn new stuff. It was really interesting for me to sit down and study that stuff because I already loved doing that as Fox. But it's a lot harder to find new stuff as Fox, whereas as Ices in the post-wobbling world, there was cool new stuff to be found everywhere. Or there was a lot of stuff that people had found like 20 years ago that just had never been relevant because you could just wobble instead. And now there's like an avenue for people to actually test these things out and see where you can go with that.
Well, one of the things that I do want to ask you, as just a fan of the game, I feel like I try to study a little bit about every character, and wow, ice climbers, there's a lot of stuff, like you just said. I mean, it's such an intricate character. Do you feel like it's one of the more complex characters in the game?
Yeah, for sure. Just the ability of like being able to do any two moves at the same time, including movement options and all that kind of stuff. It opened up so many possibilities that Ices are one of the most complicated characters and also one of the most technical characters for that reason.
What do you feel like is something that people, whether it be, the casual player or commentators or even maybe players at a high level, don't understand about ICs that is important to the context of their character?
Um, the uh, the first answer I usually give to that question is how Ice Climber's movement in general is limited because of Nana getting stuck everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you just want to wave land off a platform, it's difficult to do that in the normal way without Nana getting stuck on the platform. You can't dash dance properly without Nana like getting desynced from you. So there's lots of ways in which the ICs are limited, where they instead have to use either desyncs or just different types of attacks like undershoots or overshoots to make up for the lack of like traditional movement that they have, especially because they're also so slow and bad in the air. But yeah, mostly it comes down to nana management and also like how you how you combo. when you know that Nana isn't going to be with you anymore after the next hit. Because there are combos that you can do where you throw out Nana, you know that if she lands, you have your follow-up. And if she doesn't, you have to consider like, do I first go back and reconnect with her and then continue like the sharking situation or neutral game? Or do I just leave her off on her own and have the confidence to keep going by myself? Because I know that I can keep this combo going for long enough that she will eventually reconnect with me anyways, right? So
Hmm.
these small decisions of like, is this a combo worth continuing on my own, or do I first need to get my girl back to make her help me out? That's I think really fun, but it gets missed very easily.
I mean, how are you able to contextualize these decisions in game under pressure? Because like I main Fox for example. I'm like a two and twoer, right? I'm nairing, I'm drilling. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah,
It's like
let's
it's
go.
yeah, exactly. I'm not really thinking like that, and you're out here doing computational wizardry to try to make your character survive another 20% or get that extra 20% on a combo to try to get a grab here or somewhere. How are you able to do that against top players in game fives? I mean, it just sounds crazy.
Um, I think it just comes down to how you practice in general, and especially how you practice your punish game, because you should always be, or can approach it in a way where you think about like, how do I end up taking the stock from my opponent, right? As ICs, it's quite simple because sometimes you can just say, oh yeah, I just have to grab them by the ledge with Nana next to me, which is already a lot because you have to get them into a certain position, you have to grab them right there, you have to have Nana with you. So usually it's just like, how can I keep my opponent in a combo where at the end of it, I can somehow see myself either like just getting a smash attack to KO them or get the grab and then with that grab get my smash attack to get the KO. So I kind of try to work my way backwards from like, how do I actually get the stock right now? Like what edge guards are possible from this position or, which edge guards are possible 2 steps from now if I do 2 more things. And then from those, combo enders, I try to go back to like, how I could start to eventually end up in that position. And sometimes, of course, you have to know like what your combo game and your combo finishes are when you have Nana, and you have to know what they are when you don't have her. And then you also need to know how you can stall for time while keeping the opponent in a bad spot so that you can, give Nana time to reconnect with you. So it's that last part is like the main difference, but it's actually not too different, right? It's just like you're playing Fox, you're like chain grabbing someone, and you just gotta somehow stall for time until your up smash comes back to you, right? Like, let's
Hmm.
just say your little second Fox buddy isn't there, so you can't up smash for whatever reason, and you just gotta make sure that like you tech chase the Falcon for another 2 seconds, so that when you manage to do that, now you can up smash him.
Are there like when you're talking about practice, when in terms of practicing Fox versus practicing Ice Climbers? I mean, are there certain scenarios where you're just practicing Sopo by himself? Like, what does your practice routine, I guess, look like especially when you're starting off with Ice Climbers? Because I think a lot of people are interested in picking up the character but don't even know where to start. You know?
Yeah, I think my routine or the way I approach it isn't that different from how I did it as Fox, which I think helps me a lot as ICs. Because as Fox, I just looked at like what tech skill is there that good players are doing that they're using to take their stock that leads into KOs. And then I try to learn that and recreate that and become as consistent as it as possible. Because if your tech skill is holding you back, then your neutral game will suffer from it quite a bit. And you'll also learn the neutral game more slowly because you're not going to be able to accurately assess what's worth it and what isn't if you can't actually play the things out properly, right? Certain options from your opponents might be really strong if you don't have a certain punish lapped out against it or you just can't execute it. But once you can execute it, the entire matchup changes. So getting your execution down was the first thing I did as Fox and as ICs. As Fox, I started doing like, wave shine up smash and then drill wave shine up smash and then running shine, short up drill wave shine up smash, whatever, all that kind of stuff. And as ICs, I approached it a very similar way. I looked at like, all right, now that wobbling is banned, what are people doing in a grab? I tried to recreate that. And then, because I was trying this stuff out, I would ask questions about like, why are we doing this way? Why aren't we, doing this instead that might do more damage? And in most situations, there are good reasons from people that, of why things were done a certain way. But for a lot of things as ICs that I started learning, I was able to ask questions and then clarify in a way where at least I realized that the common conceptions of how things should be done aren't as set in stone yet as they are for Fox. Because as Fox, you know how you know, can end up taking the stock from pretty much any positions. With Ice Climbers, a much more rare character who recently had their entire combo game like removed, there's a lot more stuff to actually figure out in that way. And because I did learn the game with Fox already, it was pretty simple to apply like that tech skill learning mindset of like trying to be efficient with what you do and having everything down that you can do 100% of the time at all times. Yeah, I think that played into each other really nicely.
How important is the ice climbers community in terms of developing these, new techniques or developing these new game plans or punishes? Because, even during the Eggdog Invitational, the commentators were always talking back to how, you're in the ice climbers Discord, still answering messages and stuff like that. I mean, how important is that community, and is that something that you think it is needed for players who want to get better?
Um, I think it's very, very important. I don't like Discord like as a medium for, just gathering and storing information, just because all of the discussion that happens there can drown out the important stuff really easily.
Mm.
Which is one of the reasons why I made my Ice Climbers guide that has like a document with all the tech skill that I think is actually important, and then has a video for each piece of tech so that people can just look at it and learn how it works. Um, but for Ice Climbers, especially post wobbling ban, I think it's extremely important because, first of all, there's so much knowledge out there that either has gotten lost or that only a few people know nowadays, that being able to talk to those people is a big deal. And with a character like Ices, right now the meta is very weird because we had Slug do really well without wobbling, but Slug wasn't doing a bunch of stuff that is would just be like, for example, like 20 more free percent during a grab. He just wouldn't do that because he just didn't like doing it or he hadn't practiced it before. So people would try to play the game the way he did, which is great. If you can play neutral like he does, then that's amazing. But I think there's so many like free or easy improvements to be made that people didn't know if they were worth learning, that having just one person show that something is possible and worth going for is a big deal, because once one person does it and shows that it's possible, now everyone knows that this can be the case, and then the entire character has just changed.
Hmm.
And having people in there who either have the ideas and can give them to the people who have the good tech skill or just are good at the game, or just having a large amount of people where if you ask a question, then maybe 90% of the answers will be wrong, but the 10% that give correct answers are so important that they will change how you play forever. It's really important to just be there to ask your questions and yeah, involve yourself with what's going on so that you're always up to date on the new stuff.
I gotta ask real quick, where do you find the ice climbers guide that you've made?
Just you can find it on my YouTube. My YouTube channel is called SSBM Nicki. It should also be pinned in the Ice Climbers Discord if someone's in there. Yeah, it's like a 4 video series, but there is a main document that is pinned on my Twitter account that will take you to all the links and all the written guides and the video examples.
Great. I'll link them below then for our viewers. I want to get into sort of play styles. I mean, you're alluding to Slug and how he plays neutral, and how that was one of the cornerstones of how he played the game. How do you define your IC's play style, and how does it differ from the other ICs that are currently playing at a high level?
That's a good question. I've been asked that question, and I read what other people have said about like how I play versus how Slug plays. And I've never been able to like really pinpoint it because I honestly I don't really care too much about it. I care about the specific options that a person uses that work well for a situation. So if someone tells me like, oh, Slug does this in this spot and it works really well for him, then I really care about that. But like the general idea of like who what the vibes are, I've never really thought about that too much. I think that just in terms of playstyle, I think Slug is a lot better at like using full hops to call out movement from spacies. Slug is a lot better at like just generally using Blizzard in some of the important matchups, especially against Fox. I think I personally am a little bit better at like flow charting my combo game and just taking stocks. Because like I put a higher focus on like doing proper tech chases to make sure Nana gets back to you, and then always like going back into your actual kill confirms, right? because I get more damage off of my grabs and I can KO earlier off of my grabs. So I don't necessarily play for the grab more, but I play more using the moves that might lead into a grab that will then put me into a situation where I either get a follow-up with like an aerial, or I get a follow-up that leads it to a tech chase into grab, for example. So a lot of the stuff that I did as Fox of like, once you have someone at knockdown percent, you don't necessarily want to send them off stage. Sometimes you like keeping them on stage so you can get more damage, and if you execute properly, your tech chase will be guaranteed. That's something that I've carried over into my Ice Climbers gameplay as well. So like realizing when someone will land on a platform and then going for a platform tech chase grab just to get the KO that way. I think that's something I'm good at, especially because my tech when it comes to like the stuff that actually takes stocks is pretty good.
My last question with Ice Climbers specifically is that, you know, a lot of people talk about certain matchups that seem quote unquote unwinnable. Do you feel like Ices is underrated in some matchups? Do you feel like she does have like do they excuse me have a hard stuck limit? What are your thoughts on some of these matchups? I guess because to me, I still feel like there's still a lot of melee to be played. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so the way I like to think about it is that imagine like the characters Jigglypuff and Yoshi if HBox and Amsa didn't exist. Like that's what Ice Climbers are. I think there could definitely be an Ice Climbers player who is so good that they can be as good as HBox or Amsa, even like in the long run. We just haven't had that one player. We've had players who've gotten close. But if we just think about like Yoshi if Amsa didn't exist, and we just saw Zane destroy every Yoshi and whatever, we think that Yoshi loses all these matchups really hard. And I think that's the case for Ices right now, is that sure, some matchups might be hard, but we just don't know because the Ice Climbers meta and also the Ice Climbers players that have existed haven't been at the level of the good players. So I think Ices are good enough where you could beat anyone in the world with them. And that's all I really care about. Because from there, like with that confidence, I can go into every set knowing that I just have to get better at playing the game. And you know, I went to the Eggdog Invitational being put into a pool where two of the players hadn't lost to ICs in like decades and being told like, oh yeah, that's impossible. And without really having like, especially any good Yoshi practice, for example, I was able to take Amsa to game five and I was able to take HBox to game five as well. So like if I at like my second NA tournament as Ice Climbers ever, playing against these players for the very first time can already make it that close, I don't think there's like a reason to doubt the character or to think that like a secondary is necessary. If if I can do it, then I'm sure other people can as well.
I want to talk about Eggdog a little bit. I mean, just like you said, you were put in a really tough pool for your character, and you really showed the quality not only of what Ice Climbers can do, but of yourself. I mean, I really feel like you were one of the stars of the day. How was that experience playing in an intimate setting like that, and what were some of the takeaways that you took from that experience?
Um, so going into the tournament, I was somewhat afraid of just losing my first three sets and then having to play against one of the people from the last chance qualifier. In previous invitationals like Summit, of course, even if you got last in your pool, you would make it into the gauntlet stage where you could then play and then you would make it into bracket. At Eggdog, if you got last in your pool, you had to play against one of the top four from the last chance qualifier. And if you lost that set as well, you'd just be out. You wouldn't be able to make it into the bracket. So when I barely lost to HBox and then also barely lost to AMSA, it was pretty discouraging because I knew that if I had won one of these sets, I would have had a way better chance of, not going 0-4 and just having to, watch on Sunday and not getting to play in the bracket. But then when I did win my last set, or my set on Saturday against Zamu, I was extremely relieved because I knew that I would at least like get one more set in bracket the next day. So that was nice. Of course, it was extremely fun to prepare for HBox and AMSA because I had nothing to lose, right? Everyone was saying like, "Oh, awful draw. Let's just hope he doesn't go 0-3 in his pool." And I thought that okay, it might be tough, but I think just from watching these play against other American ice climbers, I don't think this should be impossible. I feel like I can at least get close, and I got much closer than I expected, which made then losing in the end feel even worse. But it also gave me a lot of confidence of like, even if I don't make it into the next day of the tournament, um, I've proven that I can do a lot of things with this character still that I never would have expected anyone could do. And the fact that I'm able to do them is, yeah, was unbelievable for me.
So, looking into the future, I saw some tweets that you were trying to make one more event happen. What are your future plans? And is trying to get ranked at a higher rank a goal, or is it just like, hey, I'm just trying to play some melee?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that my last NA event before Collision 2024 in March of this year was in 2021. So there are 2 years in 2022 and 23 where I didn't go to NA at all. So for this year, when I got the chance to fly out to Collision, thanks to Fizzy, because I was rank 1 on the European Slippy leaderboards and he wanted to help me fly out to an event. When I got that chance, I realized like, okay, now that I have this trip already prepared for me, I think it would be reasonable to try to make it onto the global rankings with ice climbers. And by that point, I had already done well enough in Europe where I kind of told myself that it would be cool if I could be ranked top 50 in the world with ice climbers this year, because like top 50 was like the next goal I kind of set myself with Fox when I was, I reached like top 100 with Fox and I was like, well, what do I do now? So like just saying, okay, now top 50 is like the obvious next step. And that's kind of what I, thought about as ICs. And then I was like, all right, I think I can try to go for this. So that's like kind of my goal for this year. So making sure I reach the eligibility criteria is really, I think, all I need to do. Because I think my wins are already good enough. I don't have any bad losses that I should be set in that regard. And then, depending on where I am this year, I think I'll just aim for a little bit higher than that for next year, depending on what chances I get. I'm going to Don't Park on the Grass in November because
Nice.
I won the announce sponsorship for Wavelength, which is next weekend. But I cannot go to Wavelength because I'm working full time now and I'm not getting vacation for that weekend. So it has to be Don't Park instead. In Germany, we have this great thing called like mandatory vacation days if you're working somewhere. Um, so if you work like, I'm working for 3 more months this year, so I get 5 guaranteed vacation days. I have to use 1 day for something else, and now I have 4 left. And now with those 4 days, I just somehow have to make Don't Park work. I'll be very jet lagged, and I'll fly home from like a 13-hour flight and have to go straight to work. But yeah, I'll at least be eligible for SSBM rank, and that's all I need from this weekend.
That's brutal, but respect to you, man. That's like a trooper right here. You're like a soldier. I want to talk a little bit before we move on to some of the hobbies and interests that occupy your time outside of melee. I do want to talk about rankings a little bit because they have came up a lot in our talk. Are you? I mean, me personally, I'm like anti rankings because I feel like it's just such a hassle. But, I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, especially as a European player, about like, for example, having to go to Don't Park, doing this, struggle of a tournament basically because you're going to be so jet lagged and tired. I mean, does that give you resentment? Because to me, it's obvious that you're top 50. I mean, what do I know? But it seems sort of obvious to me.
Yeah, I mean, I last year or this year, I created EU rank, which is like a global, not a global, a European top 50 ranking. Because Europe actually didn't have its own ranking. Um, the last one we had was in 2019, in early 2019. So there had been like 4 years of just no European rankings at all. And the tournament landscape, especially this year, had changed in a way where it has gotten harder and harder for Europeans to make it onto SSBM rank, even if you're good enough. The fact that Europe doesn't really have the majors anymore, and because Americans aren't traveling to Europe as much anymore, it's just become so difficult that I felt like in order to motivate people and to give people like the reward of having done well and having improved, a European ranking would help with that. Of course, it kind of like just having this community where people are valued based on their ranking is a bit weird. So I think it's good if we remind ourselves that getting a certain rank or someone having a certain rank versus not having it doesn't really change anything. All it really is for them to go like, oh, nice, like I achieved my goal, or like this is where I stand. SSBM rank is a great project that I think should always exist for that reason, because it brings eyes into the scene. It gives people a way to like measure themselves, because that's what like I or most levels of melee are about. You're still trying to win your sets. I don't think there's a good like that currently there isn't really a good way to make it so that other regions are more included in that ranking. So I totally get why it is the way it is now. I think the SSBM people are doing a great job at already being like respectful of, giving Europeans like lighter requirements to be eligible and stuff like that. Yeah, I think they exist. I think they're fun. I think even if they're not perfect, they can never be. They're still very important to have around. And I think if Europeans will eventually care about the European ranking to a similar extent that people care about the American or the global SSBN rank, I think that would help the European scene a lot because, giving good players something to strive for and something where they can measure their progress, that is what keeps the scene interesting, among many other things, of course.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I mean, I think a theme that I've noticed while interviewing you is just you give back. I feel like you making these ranks, you're making these guides. I believe you coach as well. You're always trying to give back. I mean, is that something important to you, trying to give back? And if so, is that like a sense of community that you're trying to build?
Um, as part of it is just like stuff that I would have liked to have, or stuff that I would like to have right now when I was getting better, or just when I'm part of the scene. Um, at some point a while ago, when I was playing Ice Climbers and learning stuff, and there wasn't really any good like examples for certain things, and you'd have to dig through the Discord and hope someone had a clip ready on their hard drive. That was pretty annoying. And eventually I realized that in Melee, if you want something, you just have to do it yourself. Like I kept thinking about like it would be really cool if German Melee had like its own circuit where people would host events and then we'd have like a summit style like final event. I had that idea throughout like over the course of 3 years, like every 3 months, and it just never happened, right? Because like no one's just gonna do that. And eventually I realized that if you want something, you just have to do it yourself. You don't have to do it all on your own. You just have to be the one who initiates the thing, who makes the plan, who figures out what needs to be done, and then get those things ready. So that's how that German Melee circuit that concluded this year came about. How EU rank that for 2023 happened. Um, yeah, I think if there's something where I think this would be nice to have for the community, if I think that 2 or 3 times and no one's done it yet, I'll just try to get myself to do it myself because if I would appreciate it, I'm sure other people would as well. And even if they don't, then at least I will have worked on a project that I enjoyed. So there's really no losing there. And so far, all of these projects have gone really well. And I think the reception has been really good too.
Is there a project that you're most proud of?
Um, Not really. I think I'm still most proud of just like my skill as a player and like,
Mm.
where I stand with that. I think my like analytical capabilities in Melee are pretty good, so I'm really happy with like my ability to create guides. Still, my guides are a bit limited by my unwillingness and inability to do editing. So I eventually realized that if I try to do these things perfectly, they will never happen because I have plenty of like fully scripted out YouTube videos, including guides or just fun discussions. But I realized that if I want to record the scripted video and then edit it and get nice visuals for it, it's just so big of a hurdle for me that I would never start working on it. So now I've kind of changed my approach, just be like, just do the thing that like the result would be nice for people to have, or you would enjoy having it if someone else did it. Even if it's not perfect, hopefully if you do it well enough, you'll get the idea across. And from there, anything else is like just a little bonus. That's also why I started doing these little discussion YouTube videos where I just talk about stuff that I currently find interesting in Melee. Because sure, I could write a very nice script and like record it in a very epic YouTube voice, but then knowing that I would have to edit it would just make it so that it never comes out. So now I just do it. It just like same thing with the rankings. Yeah, I just do it.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a great attitude that everyone can have in the scene. If you feel like you want to do something, but just go ahead and try it. Just go ahead and do it. And if it's not perfect, who cares? It's better than nothing.
Yeah, exactly. The scene needs people it doesn't need people, but it really benefits from people who just take the first step in a direction, right? Even with like EU rank, I had never done a ranking like that before. I had been part of the German Melee power ranking team, but that's just like seven guys sitting down in a Discord call one evening, and then everything gets done, and then that's it, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's like no big thing that needs to be done there. But creating like a proper European top 50 with like articles for each player and like getting the data together, finding pictures for everyone, finding a place to release it in, that was like very different from what I had done before. And I'm really looking forward to doing it again this year because I learned a lot. And I'm sure that it will be much easier this time now that I know what needs to be done and what I need to look out for.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, let's move on to some of the hobbies and interests you alluded to earlier. I mean, what are some of the things that help you stay grounded outside of Melee?
Um, I think part of it is just, of course, it is already very difficult to make Melee your main source of income, right? So if you spend time on the game and don't make sure that you're either like learning something like studying and wherever that may be, or if you're not at least like working on some sort of career outside of it that at least keeps you afloat, um, having that at this on the side is very important for me. Um, so yeah, just knowing that even if everything fails, I can never play Melee again. I'm not reliant on it financially. That's a big thing. And also, for example, I really enjoy just like running. I will have periods of time where I like go to the gym like 5 times a week for like 3 months straight just because I'm so into it at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Usually I overdo it and then I'm forced to take a break, which is why I usually like go back and forth between going to the gym and running. Because I run a lot, then my knees get hurt, then I can go to the gym instead and do other stuff there. So it kind of like goes back and forth. But that's stuff I really enjoy where I can really like read stuff, read studies about like how to do things, try to come up with a training plan, try to get better every week. Yeah, that's very fun. And it's also just like stuff of forcing myself, not necessarily forcing, but reminding myself that spending time with other humans is good for me. Because as a Melee player, it was very easy for me to just like go to the local, spend the next 7 days just in my room grinding tech skill in a dark basement by myself, meeting no one, talking to no one. Like I don't really miss people. Like I could just spend a year like almost all on my own, and it wouldn't feel like it harms me, but I know that it's actively good for me if I like go out of my way to spend time with people that I know I like.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds kind of weird, but for me, that's like something I have to consciously remind myself of like, this is good for you. You like these people. You should do this.
No, I don't think it's weird at all, honestly. I think there's a lot of people who just like their baseline, they're pretty happy just chilling by themselves, and next thing you know,
Mm.
you're like, oh, I haven't seen anyone in a week or something like that.
Yeah.
Is there some things? What? How have you seen that benefit of being more social, even outside of the game? You know, because Melee can be a social game as well. But
Um, I think it's just that it gets me to go outside and do stuff with people because I'm not really like when I meet friends, I usually try to suggest an activity of like going to a bowling alley or like meeting outside to do some sort of physical activity or whatever. Um, and I think that just makes some really nice memories with people that you can then look back on. And it's helped me because I try to do like a yearly recap every year around the end of the year where I look back like just through my phone, the pictures I have of like what I did throughout the year. And seeing those small days sprinkled in there where I'm like outside doing stuff with people to remind myself that the game isn't the only thing that makes me happy. There's like plenty of other things that do a similar job. Yeah, that helps me remind myself of what my priorities should be if I forget them.
yeah, I feel like that's a lesson that a lot of Melee players can learn. You know what I mean? Is that you can still be a fantastic player without it being the crux of who you are. You know?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've gotten better quicker with Ice Climbers than I did with Fox. I think the biggest reason for that is still just that the character suits me better and the character better suits what I'm already good at in the context of the game. Um, I do think I could be similarly good with Fox pretty quickly nowadays if I, approach it a similar way. Um, but yeah, it's very good when you know that you have everything else figured out, and then you can actually enjoy Melee without like the losses feeling as bad, and just with a more clear headspace that yeah lets you approach your own improvement more consciously, and also lets you handle the losses a lot more easily.
Do you have any other creative outlets? I mean, I know you've said the gym and you're a runner. Do you have any, like, I know there's a lot of Melee players who play music. There's a lot of people who do art. Do you have any of those outlets, or are you like me, someone who is can't do any of that really well?
Um, I think when I was in school, like when I was like 6 to 14 years old, if you put a pencil in my hand or a pen in my hand and ask me to draw something, I would just start crying on the spot because I was always like bad at drawing, and then I was told that I'm bad at drawing, which made me not want to do it, and then I would just kept getting worse and worse, and then eventually like going to art class in like sixth grade was just the worst time of my week every single week. So yeah, I've not been a super creative person. My dad maybe played the trumpet for a couple of years, which was all right. But then once I started playing Melee when I was like 17, it just kind of took over my entire life, and everything else just kind of disappeared.
Hmm.
Nowadays, I do sometimes play the piano. I'm not good at all. I just play like some melodies that I like and try to play them by ear. But that's just like once every 3 weeks, and then if I have time to be creative, then and I do end up being creative, it's usually because I had some idea about Melee stuff that I want to try out, and then I tried an Uncle Punch, and then I hop on Unranked to make a funny clip of it and to post on Twitter, and that's like my creative outlet. It's like my Melee thoughts and like organizing them and then getting them out to people.
That's awesome. I love this game. This game is so crazy that you can just do that. You can have like a creative outlet through the game.
Yeah.
Do you play any other games? I guess that would be my last question because we're running out of time. But do you play any other games for fun or competitively?
I try, but I just never managed to. So before I played Melee, I was like playing League of Legends, but even in that game, it was kind of similar to how I was with Melee in the beginning, where I watched a lot, I consumed a lot of content, but I wouldn't actually play it that much myself. A big part of that was just like having ladder anxiety of like if I play the ranked games, then I know if I'm good or bad.
Mm.
But if I just watch and like then play unranked games, then I won't have to feel bad about losing because I knew that if I lost, I would feel bad about myself. Um, so yeah, I followed that game all the time, and but I would say that I like watched and consumed content like 95% of the time, and then like maybe 5% of my time with League of Legends was spent actually playing it, which was very similar to how I then started with Melee. But yeah, other than that, I don't know. Sometimes like I'll get myself to like play through one of my childhood video games like maybe once a year. Might be like a Pokemon game, might be um, I don't know, like an N64 game. I think throughout the last 2 years or so, my most played game besides Melee is probably Pokemon Emerald Rogue, which is a ROM hack of Pokemon Emerald that I just like sit down with my girlfriend to play, and it's just like a thing we do in the evenings, which is fun. Um, but yeah, other than that, I'm really bad at playing other games. Like if you sit me down, people have tried to get me to play like good games, maybe some AAA games. I just sit down and make it like 10 minutes, and then like I just think, damn, I just really want to hop on Unranked right now. Like where are my Falcos? Like I wanna this is not like hitting the spots a video game should for me, and then I
Hmm.
end up playing Melee again. So yeah, it's really hard for me to play anything that is Melee.
I feel that. I honestly don't. I used to play Counter Strike a little bit, but now I just only play Melee when I have the time because it's just too good.
Yeah, it's you can just hop on, you find a match in like less than a minute. You can leave at any point, which is something I hated about League. If you
Hmm.
start a game and it goes on for like an hour, if you leave the game, you'll get banned because you're leaving like your four teammates behind.
Hmm.
In Melee, I can just quit out whenever. Yeah, it's great. We're
That
playing a good game.
that is one thing that games need to come back to is the fact like I can just boot up Slippy. Shout out Slippy, the goat. Oh my god, this greatest thing ever made. Shout out Fizzy. But you can just boot it up, boom, unranked, boom, I'm playing someone. Like in 3 seconds, I'm done. In 5 minutes, I'm out of here. I gotta go somewhere. You know what I mean? There's like no
Yeah,
games that you can do that anymore. It takes like 10 minets to load or whatever. I don't know. What do I know? But anyways.
exactly. No, you're so right. You're so right.
Well, on that note, I think our time is up. But thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure interviewing you. This has been Items On. I'm your host, Ethiopium. Our guest today was Nicki. Thank you so much for listening.